And welcome to another episode of Entrepreneurship Uncovered, 3 resources employers need to know when dealing with employee mental health. I'm Gabrielle Luma, CPA, CGMA, and CEO of Mod Ventures. I will facilitate and join in this discussion with Jason Flax from BBSI. Before we start, let me tell you a little bit about Mod Ventures. Mod Ventures is an outsourced accounting and advisory company for businesses across the United States. Our accounting team is entirely virtual and has been since 2014. Our passion is to help entrepreneurs organize, create, and predict their financial futures. Strong small businesses create financially stable communities. So that's what we're all about. And today we have Jason with us from BBSI. Jason is a human resource professional with over 25 years of HR, insurance, and business operations experience in the Tucson market. For the past decade, Jason has served on the Society for Human Resource Management of Greater Tucson Board, presented on key topics, including finance for HR, generational impact on the workplace, and impact of mental health on the workforce. Jason is a proud Chicago native, a fan of his hometown sports teams, and considers himself a professional golfer in his mind. That's great. Jason, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Gabby.
Yeah.
Bear down, by the way, I am a U of A graduate, so.
Oh, okay. There you go. There you go. Yeah, we probably have a lot of U of A grads that are either tuning in or, checking us out because we're in the local market. So super fun. I was not a U of A graduate. I actually, I've been here since 2003 or 2000. So I feel like I'm a native now. Like if you've been in Tucson for 20 plus years, you're somewhat of a native. So today I'm really excited to jump into this conversation regarding employers and mental health and how we can really support our teams. So why don't you give me from the basic question of why is this important to employers?
Mental health has been a really big buzzword for the last couple of years. I think that the pandemic really accentuated mental health and wellness, people being isolated, people being quarantined. It did a number on us mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
But we've heard for decades employers saying to us, right, hey, your personal life is your personal life, your work life is your work life. They should be kept separate,
Mhm.
right? And that needs to be the focus if we're going to be successful as an organization. Well, I think that's changed. I think generationally that's changed. That might have been a baby boomer philosophy. That might have been a early Gen Xer philosophy of put your head down, go to work, right, until you retire. But as we get into the millennial generations and we get into the Gen Ys and the Gen Xs and the Gen Zs, their viewpoint of mental health, they are so much more self-aware of their own mental health and wellness.
Mhm.
So why should employers be concerned about it? Because it's going to have a direct impact on the productivity of the workforce and then ultimately the profitability that they're going to have in their organization.
Mhm.
So I think if we had to take one thing away of the why is mental health important, is that it's important to the bottom line and
Mm.
it's going to have a direct impact that way,
Yeah.
right? And so, I mean, happy employees equal a profitable business, and we can direct that and dial that to specific lines on a profit and loss statement.
Mhm.
So it's really important to understand that there should no longer be a separation between finance and HR. Finance and HR really have to work well together
Yeah.
in order to really accomplish what the financial goals are for an organization and then the personal goals of the workforce. So
Yeah.
I think it's hugely important
Mhm.
from that standpoint.
Right. Right. Well, and I think that you've given me some statistics that were, quite astounding. I would say that, the mental health crisis in our country and state of Arizona, you said specifically, it was like the third suicide was the third leading cause of death in Arizona, which I thought was quite shocking, but it's not surprising after coming off of, COVID and all the things that were happening during that time frame. And so when we're really looking at um, our staff and investing in areas for them, um, their life is so much more important than anything else. And so I think that that's a big area that business owners need to really consider when looking at this and their benefits for their employees and staff.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look statistically at the trend that's going on, by 2030, there's going to be $6 trillion that are going to be associated with business cost just due to mental health.
Wow.
That's by 2030. So that's coming up quick and around the corner, right? I mean, I still look at, 5 years ago is the 90s, but 5 years from now is 2029, right?
I know. This time
We're
goes by so fast.
it's incredible. It's incredible. Um, and yes, according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, if we look at the statistics of our core workforce, right, from 24 to 55, suicide is the third leading cause of death in the state of Arizona. That's behind COVID, which now has kind of passed, and heart disease.
Mhm.
So we're looking at suicide as such a massive cause for death.
Mhm.
Well, suicide is a direct result of stress, anxiety, depression, mental illness, right, and all of the things that happen kind of between, right, the two ears.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand as an employer that we have direct impacts
Mhm.
on that piece for
Right.
our employees, right?
Mhm.
Life is stressful.
Mhm.
A professional life is stressful. A personal life is stressful. So I think employers really need to start looking at the work day, kind of differently for employees. And when I say that, um, I think it's important to understand that a day of a person is really carved into thirds,
Right.
right? 8 hours a day is work. Then
Mhm.
8 hours a day is for personal. And then 8 hours a day, hopefully, is for rest,
Yeah.
right? So when we run into these scenarios on a work-life balance type of a dynamic, employers really had a hard time grasping that over the last, decade, 15, 20 years, as that's been a buzzword. Well, the reason is because they're focused on the 8 hours a day.
Right.
What am I going to do for the 8 hours a day? Why should the other 8 hours be important to me? That's a personal thing.
Right.
And what we know now is our personal is impacting our mental health. Then that mental health, right? The mental challenges that we are facing, whatever it is coming into the workforce regardless. We can't shut it off when we walk in the door.
Right.
So now you've got productivity, employee engagement, right, and profitability being affected.
Mhm.
On top of that, you've got stress from work. So
Mhm.
now the stress directly related from work is compounding whatever's going on. So employers, if they want to truly look at a work-life balance environment and create employee engagement, they've got to look at the day being 16 hours.
Right.
What can I do as an employer to help support my employees in 16 hours,
Right.
not just the 8 that I'm paying them for, right? Because wages is just for hours worked,
Yeah.
but benefits is used outside of work time traditionally.
Right.
So that's where that work-life balance conversation can really start. So I think that's a great way for employers to start looking and acknowledging work-life balance and mental health.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really interesting conversation because I don't know that, you know, I've equated, work life with 16 hours. I just know that, if somebody is so stressed out that, during their normal 8 hours, the rest of their life's not going to be that great. And I mean, I've experienced it, if you're a knowledge worker, white collar, you're, working on a computer all day long, there's a level of stress with that type of work that you are not going to be able to be productive if it gets too high, right? All kinds of things start to seep in, and it could show up in procrastination or, um, you know, inability to focus. And, there's like all kinds of things that happen when somebody who is a knowledge worker is sitting in front of that computer and just cannot do any more. And so our profession, we have tax season, and um, there's a lot that goes on in tax season, and so trying to keep up with everything that's happening, and each individual person has just, it gets quite overwhelming. And so, anything that we can do in our industry or for our clients to help with that type of overwhelm, that's something that we've really tried to dive into and build that out with them. So, like, let's reduce the stress. Let's figure out what we can do for you.
It's also an understanding of the overall role, right?
Mhm.
I am a child of tax season. My father was an accountant,
Okay.
right? So I can tell you from November to Easter, right? Thanksgiving to Easter, my father was pretty non-existent,
Yeah.
right? So everything fell on my mother to
Mm-hmm.
take care of from a household perspective. And my mother worked as well. She was a nurse. So I was a typical Gen X latchkey kid,
Yeah.
right? So
Me too.
which is why we're okay. Gen X's
Yeah.
we're doing fine. It's
We'll be
okay.
okay.
We're
Yeah.
doing good. You don't need to check on us too much,
Right.
right? To a degree, because now it's starting to catch up with us. But
Right. Yeah.
understanding that role, I never had a real strong relationship with my father from Thanksgiving to Easter,
Right.
right? From that time frame. But my summers were full of my father coaching baseball, of him doing things with me, because that was more of his downtime. So he
Yeah.
had the ability to spend more time with me then. So while, yes, he was tremendously stressed during tax season,
Yeah.
he was able to take several months and de-stress. And his whole office was that way too. You couldn't find
Yeah.
anyone in his office in the summertime. It
Right.
was it was hard pressed. And
Yeah.
of course, this is during a time when cell phones were not round,
Right.
so your
Uh,
accountant wasn't too accessible during the
right.
summertime.
You had to go to the office. Like, you really had to go to the office, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, those days were completely different. I mean, even earlier in my career, it's completely different than it is now. So, in the level of ways that people can get a hold of you, it's not just email, it's also social media. I have clients text, send me messages on social media and things like that. And I love them. So, no big deal. But you are way more accessible. So it's a completely different world that we are living in.
And
And
accessibility also leads to increased stress,
right.
increased anxiety, because now, right there, since I am accessible and since you are accessible 24/7 with
Yeah.
text and phone and email and social media, right now anybody can say anything, and things are more visible to the general public. So it's very easy to get caught up in that side of social
Right.
media, which is going to create some kind of mental um, breakdown, so to
Yeah.
speak, right? And maybe breakdown's not the right word, but you're gonna have a mental crisis
Right.
from
Well,
that standpoint.
it's always being on, right? I think people need to, find ways to disconnect and not always be on. And I think that social media has added a little bit of, trouble with that. And from someone who adopted social media pretty early in the Tucson area, um, I really backed off because it's just like, you can't keep up the volume. It's just so many things to do. Um, so when we were talking about, ways to, help with employees and mental health and all of that, you mentioned the emotional side of productivity and ways to really improve those areas. So what are your thoughts on that?
Think if we're talking about the emotional side of productivity, I think that lands as a primary responsibility of leadership in an organization. Um, Leadership has changed dramatically over 50 years. 50 years ago, when you were in a leadership position, you could drive the employees from a productivity standpoint. And that was really it, right? The idea of micromanaging and managing to a number was the standard.
Right.
It was acceptable. And that's what was taught.
Hmm.
I think today, leadership has changed. We hear a lot of buzzwords, right? We're not talking about managing anymore. We're talking about leading. We're
Yeah.
not talking about necessarily about leading, but we're talking about coaching, right? So it's whatever terminology you want to use. I think the important underlying thing to understand is that it's about people. It's no longer about numbers. So it's about managing people.
Hmm.
And every person is different, which means you have to lead and coach and manage each employee a little bit different. And
Yes.
there's only one way to do that. You have to get to know your staff. You
Yeah.
have to get to know your people, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to experience genuine, and you're going to be able to showcase genuine empathy for your employees about how well they are doing in their job,
Yeah.
right? And I say how well they're doing is because nobody is bad at their job,
Hmm.
right? It's just we have opportunities to develop those employees.
Right.
Now, when you get to know your employees and you're able to experience empathy, now you're able as an organization to really work on the deficiencies in order to get those employees to where they need to be for the organization to be profitable.
Right.
So I think the downfall of leadership today, when we look at a company that's not necessarily profitable, when we look at a company that's not reaching their goals, when we look at a company that has high turnover, when we look at a company that just has costs that might feel like they're really out of control, I think we have to go back and look at, well, we have leadership then that is too focused on the business and not focused enough on the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something that is a very difficult shift,
Yeah.
because we're in a transition timeline
Right.
with our economy. We have a lot of baby boomers
Hmm.
still in those leadership positions and those ownership positions, and we have, while at the same time we have that Gen X millennial generation rising into leadership with a different mindset and a different viewpoint.
Right.
So it's it's a we're in a gray area right now.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I've always had a tough time walking that balance, right? Between people first and then profit, because I'm like, I need to make payroll, so I think that, that is definitely a maturing of a company and the leadership, and as they're able to do, grow, they do better. But I think that that is a great thought on that, because turnover definitely is an indicator. Sometimes it also is an indication of growth, and that people, have either been grown out or the company has outgrown them. So I think there's so many things when you start talking about turnover. And then, I mean, we could even get into coaching out and what that looks like, but you know, it leadership has changed dramatically. It's not just like, hey, here's the axe. It's like, how can we help you, you know, move forward in your career, whether it be with us or not with us. Either way, we're going to help you move forward. So that's again a whole nother conversation, but I just find it fascinating when you're talking about, just growing your team and helping them in all these different ways. So yeah, I think there's a huge demand on leadership to shift. And you're right. No one wants to be managed. They want to be coached. Um, and there's a big difference between the two. So I would say even in the last 10 years, that's changed.
Dramatically. And I've talked to so many HR professionals in this town and nationwide that are always asking, where are some good resources in relation to leadership and coaching, and what are,
Yeah.
who should I be listening to, who should I be reading, right? Where should I be looking for some of, these trends and some of the guidance on there? And I tell them, I go, stop reading management books.
Hmm.
Stop giving your managers how to be a better manager book. You really want to create a cultural shift in leadership,
Yeah.
give them all parenting books.
Oh,
Give them all parenting books. And
wow.
I'll tell you, and we didn't talk about this before, Gabby, but I will tell you in a very short period, this is my philosophy on employees, right? We all hear small and mid-sized businesses, oh, we're family, right?
Yeah.
Well, every family is dysfunctional. Come on. No,
Yes.
no family is normal, right? There's an element of dysfunction in every family. So, but here's what I say. How does parenting equate to managing in the modern day business? Well, when you hire a person today, you're really hiring them for experience,
Hmm.
right? There's not too many companies out there that will train you from the bottom up. Somebody just randomly walks in the door. I want to do this. Can you train me from the bottom up? That's very
Right.
difficult. Our world works so fast today.
Yes.
So we're looking for people with experience. So we're biased. We say, because they have experience, I'm going to assume that they can do this, and I can accelerate, or I can hold them accountable to a larger standard or a
Yeah.
different standard. When in reality, that person coming into your organization is like a toddler,
Yeah.
right? They might be able to walk a little bit, they might be able to talk a little bit, but they don't know you. They don't know
Right.
your culture. They don't know your organization. They don't know your processes. They don't know your product. They don't know your service. Those are things that they have to learn along the way. So when you're hiring for experience, all you really do is hiring somebody that can maybe walk and talk,
Yeah.
right? Then you have to really spend some time and develop them. Would you ever leave a toddler alone in your home?
No,
Never. So
never.
why do we leave employees that we hire with experience by themselves for so long?
Yeah.
Right? So if we give them attention, if we nurture them, if we show them the way, then they're going to eventually develop into teenagers
Right.
within our organization. And what do we know about teenagers? They want to challenge status quo.
Right.
They know everything, right? And so now you kind of have to let them do that.
Right.
You kind of have to let them go through that phase. You still have to provide guidance. You still have to provide some supervision. You still got to provide direction, but let them make those mistakes.
Yeah.
They're going to learn. And then eventually they will turn into that mature adult slash employee that you wanted to hire in the interview.
Hmm.
So really, as a manager, as a leader, as a coach in your organization, your goal is to manage the timeline that those employees go through those phases. And
Mm.
you want them to go through the toddler and the teenager phase in a shorter period of time so that they can have as much time with you in the adult productivity stage.
I love
And
it.
I think that that's where that parenting support of that parenting ideology behind
Yeah.
it is
Hmm.
really beneficial to managers and leaders to organizations today.
Right.
And it's, if we look at it now, we're managing people,
Yeah.
right? Because whether you like it or not, when you have a toddler in your house, you have a toddler in your house. You can't just fire the toddler,
Right.
open the door, kick him out the door, and send it on its way,
Right.
right?
Right.
You, it, that's yours for the next
Yeah.
18 years,
Yep.
sometimes more.
Right.
That toddler is yours, just
Hmm.
like the employee.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that's where that mirror image comes from.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I don't know if my employees would like me to call them my kids, but it's a great way to explain stages. I think that's great.
That's exactly right. It's a
Yeah.
very easy way to explain stages that
Right.
most people are familiar with.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So when we started also talking about things, we said for sure we wanted to mention, having a benefit strategy that was going to be really great resource for our employees. And so can we jump into that and talk a little bit more about benefit strategy?
Well, I think that from a benefit strategy standpoint, remember we talked before about splitting the day into thirds.
Yeah.
Well, wages are really the benefit that employees are getting for their 8 hours of day that they're working for you.
Right.
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 So the wage is the reward for the hours worked. The rest of the benefits package are the resources that the employer is giving the employee to help them manage their lives, their personal lives, in the other 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes it's more than 8 hours. Sometimes it's right the other 16.
Right.
So if we're really looking and we want to be looking at an employee's well-being, right? A compensation strategy should be about an employee's total well-being, which means we have to look at a total compensation statement,
Mm-hmm.
right? How are we supporting our employees financially and what financial resources are we giving them? 401ks, right? Profit sharing, ESOPs, things of that nature to help them in that regard. We have to look at medical, dental, vision, disability, right? Life insurance, right? All of the things that we look at to help us manage our lives is all part of a total compensation statement. And the idea of an employer providing these, we could say it's to attract and retain top talent, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the idea behind it.
Yeah.
Let let's be real about it. As an employee, the more comprehensive that benefit package is, the easier my personal life is, because now I don't have to go out and do all of the research and try and find something and become an expert in an area that I'm not an expert. My employer's vetted that and has said, here are things for you to utilize in your personal life to help give you some stability, right?
Right.
To help give you some health, to help give you some wellness, right? In that regard. So we're very focused right now on minimum wage and the rise of minimum wage.
Yeah.
But sometimes employing a much more comprehensive benefit strategy and not raising your internal wages is just as, if not more effective for your employees,
Yeah.
depending on the education you give them. Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And since we're kind of talking around the topic of mental health a little bit,
Yeah.
and that's been kind of the theme here, is the most underutilized benefit that an employer can provide is an EAP program.
Yeah.
An EAP program is the stepping stone. It is the gap. It's the only type of real plan that really helps you focus on what's between your ears. And it's not just an EAP program is not just therapy,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right? It's not just therapy. It's I need a daycare center and I don't know where to go, right? Your EAP program might be able to give you a list of daycare centers in your area with good reviews. I'm not sure how to handle a financial situation. They can direct you towards a financial advisor that can provide you with some guidance. An attorney sometimes, right? So it's not just, you know, I'm broken and I want a therapist to fix me, right? Or
Right.
I'm upset and I want a therapist to fix me. The other thing that we can do to utilize our EAP programs in the HR world is utilize our EAP programs as part of performance management. If
Mm-hmm.
you notice that an employee's performance is dropping and they've been a stellar performer for you, something is going on.
Yeah.
Maybe that something is in their personal life and they don't want to talk about it. Well,
Right.
maybe part of this performance management plan in order to get you back on track
Mm-hmm.
is that you need to engage with the EAP so that you can work on whatever it is that's going on in your personal life. And that's going to help accelerate your healing process towards that,
Right.
which will ultimately lead back to productivity in the workplace. So I don't think we utilize the EAP nearly as much as we should as a first responder
Right.
in
Yeah.
our organizations.
I think it's one of those benefits you just completely forget about and it just hangs out there, you know? So it's like, I, I have been reminding everybody like almost every other week, like, hey, use this because it's been really helpful. And this is how I used it, you know? So I'll give them examples of how I'm using it, you know, just silly things like those virtual assistants that can, you know, just find stuff for you. So yeah,
Absolutely.
so it's
Absolutely.
you know, anything that will help save a little bit of time and give us an example of what, you know, what you could do. So another way that we talked about, you know, helping with mental health was those flexible work arrangements. And that's a hybrid work, all that. It's huge, huge conversation right now. people going back to work, things like that. So, what are your thoughts on, mental health and hybrid and traditional work?
So I think the pandemic did really terrible things for our mental health
Yeah.
as a society. But then I also think it did really amazing things for the workplace. Um, if we look historically at some of these virtual ways of working, right, we are all now in 2023 very proficient at Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, right? Whatever platform, meeting platform that we want to be on, we're very comfortable in those now.
Right.
Well, these were all around before the pandemic started,
Yeah.
right? Organizations just had a thought process and mental and a mental ideology that, right,
Yeah.
work happens in the office.
Right.
That's where it happens. But then the pandemic and the quarantine said, well, we still need to work. We still need to get work done. We need to figure out how to do it. And they, right, embraced these teleconferencing and these different ways of meeting virtually and doing business virtually. So it accelerated actually our economy's use of technology
Right.
in the workplace. Well, now what are we doing? We're wanting people to come back into the office. Okay. But people got pretty comfortable
Right.
working from home,
Right.
right? So now you're asking me to work in the office. I don't necessarily want to do that, right? And that kind of led to the great resignation. And of course, we now have so many people in the workforce of a younger generation that change is like simple for them, right? They're on different apps on their phone all the time and deleting
Right.
and changing, right? So change is not an issue for the younger workforce. For
Right.
the older workforce, it is.
Right.
So now we have this dynamic, right? This push pull of you need to be back in the office, but I've been doing the job for 2 years in a remote environment.
Right.
Why? Everything's fine. So now I think we're trying to hybridize that and we're trying to come to a realization in the workplace of when is it okay to work at home versus when do we need to have you in the office and what's the reason to have you in the office, right? It's
Right.
important for a social dynamic coming back to the office, right? It's great for employee engagement. It's great for mental health to be around people. We're very social creatures. But at the same time, sometimes people get more work done at home,
Yeah.
which is okay. So I think we have to define what does flexible office hours really mean.
Right.
Right?
I feel like this has been a conversation in CPA firms in any way for years because they're like, what does that mean? Does that mean you come in at 10 and leave at 3? Or do you, like it's wild. But I think if you're looking at your total day with eyes open, right? You have 16 hours, you can fit work in anywhere you want. And I think that has been the challenge for um, traditional managers. Traditional managers who want butts and seats so they can watch and then micromanage possibly. But it's like, a totally different way of thinking about things. So I liked when we were discussing things that you were talking about roles and responsibilities and understanding those really well, and then setting some key performance indicators like, so this was how you could do hybrid work or do a more flexible work is, really implementing a number that they should be, in charge of, which
Yeah, that they're striving for, right? That's key performance indicators have been around for a long time, and it
yeah,
was to help it was really it's a budgeting purpose, right? If we hit these key performance indicators, we're going to make X amount of revenue,
right.
which is going to mean we meet our goals, right? So we've just extrapolated that out and made it something that's very individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have an employee that's doing medical invoicing,
Mm-hmm.
why can't they do medical invoicing at home?
Right.
Right? Oh,
Yeah.
well, I need them in the office for 8 hours. Why? If they're done doing their medical invoicing, or
Yeah.
medical coding or whatever it needs to be, if they're done with that in 5 hours at home, great.
Right.
Either they clock out for 5 hours, right? They clock out at the 5 hour mark, or they're going to stretch it to 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, as an employer, I just need them to get the work done.
Right.
right? I'm already budgeting for their 8 hours.
Right.
Why not?
Right.
Right. So when we look at that, we have to engage in the conversation of what is the role, what are the responsibilities, and then how does the productivity need to take place? Obviously, if you have line workers, right, or if you have people that are operating machinery and equipment, that is not a role that can be done at home,
Right.
right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But now go back to the side of getting to know your people so that you have empathy. Now you can be a little bit more conscientious of the things that are going on. So now you can help them and coach them manage those 16 hours a day, not just the 8 hours a day.
Right.
Right. I would be fine with an employee needing to leave 3 hours early, but then wants to come back after the doors are locked and finish.
Yeah.
Right. The traditional thought process on that is, well, no, we can't have that because nobody's going to be here. No, you mean that nobody's going to be there to look over their shoulder to make sure they're doing their work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. There's not going to be a manager here who's cracking a whip.
Right. Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
That's the traditional side of it. Right. We have a lot more trust and faith in employees today than we did back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we extend that,
Mm-hmm.
right, because trust is earned,
Right.
and trust can, and there's nothing wrong with, hey, we love that flexibility and the ability to give you that flexibility. If you're not meeting those KPIs, maybe we do need to rein that in a little bit and start talking about a different schedule.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Then that's a conversation, one-on-one. I think that's definitely something that employers, and I'll say even myself, you struggle with having those harder conversations. And that's why people just, oh, it's going to be this way or the highway, it's only going to be this way. Instead of treating employees like one-on-one, like we all are one-on-one, everybody's different, and figuring out how to help them be the most productive that they can be
Sure.
for. So I think
And
that's
people want to be a part of something.
right. Give them a
Right. They want to
purpose.
be a part of something. They want to have purpose. So, as a leader, now this is giving you an opportunity to really build up your mission and your vision and your values and your community service, and start focusing on, wow, we could actually be a bigger part of what's going on. And that's what your employees are going to respond to.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Well, Jason, I have loved this conversation. We'll have to have you back again to talk about other topics because you're so knowledgeable. But how can the world, the YouTube folks, YouTube verse, I don't even know.
Webs.
How can they get a hold of you?
Well, they can get a hold of me a multitude of ways. Of course, you can always go to my LinkedIn profile, right? And you can follow me. I do a weekly newsletter, right, called the Revenue of HR. That comes out every Friday. So feel free to connect with me on that and subscribe to that newsletter, because I'm putting out great pieces of information every week.
Yeah.
And they're little snippets. They're easy 1-2 minute reads.
Yeah.
You can find me at jason.flax@bbsi.com. And I'm here in Tucson, Arizona. So I do like the idea of social media and engagement. So you can find me in many, many places.
Okay.
Yes. But absolutely, my email and my LinkedIn are definitely very easy ways to get a hold of me. And I respond quickly because, we all have this wonderful thing
Yeah,
now
that's
in our
great phone
hands,
now.
right,
Right.
that make us accessible 24/7. So
Great.
I'm a people person and I'm always there willing to help. So those are going to be the best ways to get me.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for joining us today. And thank you so much for our audience. If you're not already subscribed, please do so that you're going to be notified when new episodes come out of Entrepreneurship Uncovered. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.